Discovery in one Pasco County neighborhood, and despite calls to deputies, neighbors say it took days before they even came to check it out. And when they did, they found a woman's badly decomposing body. Fox 13's Jordan Bowen tonight is live in Pasco now with the story, with more from neighbors and also the sheriff's office.
While that murder is solved, two other Lancaster County murders are not and have not been for years. But the victims' brothers are now trying to change that.
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
Hey everybody, it's Blobby here, once again. I hope you're all doing well on this, whenever you're watching the video. Today we're going to be diving back into the Unsolved Serial Killings Iceberg. If you've never seen an Iceberg video before, I recommend watching the first part of the series. But just to sum up what it is, it's a chart with the very top, or the top layer of the iceberg, being the most well-known things, and the bottom half being the most obscure of the items. So let's just get right into it. The 1966 and 1973 Adelaide Abductions. Joanne Radcliffe and Christine Jane Gordon were two Australian girls who went missing while attending an Australian rules football match at the Adelaide Oval on the 25th of August 1973. Their disappearance and presumed murder became one of South Australia's best-known crimes. It's thought to be related to the disappearance of the Bain children in 1966, who disappeared from Glenegg Beach near Adelaide, South Australia on the 26th of January 1966. The three children that disappeared in 1966 were Jane Beaumont, Arna Beaumont, and Grant Beaumont, aged 9, 7, and 4. The police investigation revealed that on the day of the disappearance, several witnesses had seen the children on and near Glenegg Beach with a tall man with fairish to light brown hair and a thin face, along with a sun-tanned complexion and medium build, and he was aged in his mid-30s. There were confirmed sightings of the children at Collie Reserve and Wetzel's Cake Shop on Mosley Street, Glenegg. But, despite multiple searches, neither the children nor their suspected companion were found. The parents say that their children were shy and would not play with a stranger, so it's theorized that the children had met the man on previous occasions and had grown to trust him. On one of the days before the disappearance, where the children had bought pastries and a meat pie with a €1 note, which was viewed as strange because the children's mother had only given them 6 shillings and 6 pence, which was enough for their bus fare and lunch, but never gave them the €1. It's unknown what has happened to these children, and it's thought to be linked to multiple other abductions and killings that happened near Adelaide. The Tube Sock Killings. The Tube Sock Killings, or the Mineral Washington Murders, was a case of unsolved murders that occurred in the remote areas of Lewis and Pierce County, Washington, near the remote community of Mineral Washington in 1985. There was a total of 4 people who were murdered in this case. 2 sets of couples were murdered while going on camping trips in 1985. The first couple, Stephen Harkins, age 27, and his girlfriend, Ruth Cooper, age 42, had left their home in Washington on August 10, 1985, to spend a weekend camping at Toole Lake in Pierce County. When the two didn't return to their jobs the following Monday, their families reported them missing. 4 days later, hikers passing through Pierce County found Harkins' body near a remote campsite. He was shot in the head while sleeping in his sleeping bag. Nearby searches led to the discovery of Harkins and Cooper's pet dog, who had been shot to death as well. On October 26th of that year, a skull had been found at the end of 8th Avenue, south near Harts Lake, about 1.5 miles from Harkins' body. The dental records confirmed the skull belonged to Cooper, and 2 days later, on October 28th, her body and purse were discovered from the area. A tube sock was tied around Cooper's neck. According to the autopsy, Cooper had died from homicidal violence, but a spokesman had later stated that she had died from a gunshot wound to her abdomen. Over a month after the discovery of Ruth Cooper, Mike Ramir, age 36, and his girlfriend Diana Robertson, age 21, along with their daughter Crystal Louise Robertson, age 2, had traveled from their Tacoma home to Pierce County in order to find a campsite near the Nisqually River. As an animal trapper, Ramir had also planned on checking his traps that he set in that area. Later that evening, customers at a Kmart store 30 miles north in Spanway had found the couple's daughter Crystal standing outside the store entrance. Crystal was placed in temporary foster care until her maternal grandmother had seen her photograph on the local news 2 days later. When asked about her mother, the 2-year-old said that her mommy was in the trees. According to investigators, the child wasn't verbal enough to provide any further information. Police had searched by air and by foot to find Ramirez's red pickup truck, but efforts were fruitless. Over 2 months after the disappearance, the body of Diana Robertson was found half buried in the snow by a motorist near a logging road off of Washington State Route 7 in Mineral. Bloodhounds had searched the area in the following days, but the 6 inches of snow had made it difficult. Ramirez's pickup truck was then found nearby to Robertson's body. On the dashboard, a note was found that had read, "I love you, Diana." Bloodstains were also discovered on the seat of the truck, and an autopsy had revealed that Robertson had been stabbed 17 times and had a tube sock tied around her neck, just like what had happened to Ruth Cooper. While it's thought due to the whereabouts of Ramirez still being unknown, he might have been responsible for Harkin's and Cooper's murders as well, but an alternative theory claimed that he was also a victim. In February of 1986, a Seattle Post-Intelligencer published an article that revealed Raymer had been charged with domestic assault against Robertson on October 19, 1985. However, they had reconciled by December, which was the month they had vanished. In 2011, a development was had. Hikers discovered a partial human skull, later determined to be that of Mike Raymer. After inspection of the skull, it was believed that he could have been another victim of homicide, but they were unable to determine the cause of death. To this day, the tube sock killings are unsolved with no suspects listed in the case. The Walker family murders. In December of 1959, Christine and Cliff Walker, along with their 2 children, were murdered in their Osprey, Florida home. Authorities believe that 24-year-old Christine Walker had arrived at the family's farm home around 4 p.m. on Saturday, December 19, 1959, where she was violated and then murdered by gunshot. Her husband Cliff, aged 25, had then arrived with their 3-year-old son Jimmy and 1-year-old daughter Debbie. Cliff was ambushed and killed by a gunshot. Then Jimmy and Debbie were murdered. Jimmy was shot, and Debbie was shot and then drowned in the bathtub. The only physical evidence left at the scene were a bloody cowboy boot, a cellophane strip from a cool cigarette wrapper, and a fingerprint in the bathtub faucet. There's been 587 people who were suspected at one point or another, with a serial killer named Emmett Monroe Spencer confessing to the murders at one point, but it was discredited due to the Sarasota County Sheriff Ross Boyer labeling Spencer as a pathological liar, along with another tip from a bartender who had heard that one of her customers had been boasting about committing the killings, but the tip had never been verified. In 2012, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office began investigating possible links between the Walker family murders and Perry Smith and Richard Dick Hickok, who had been convicted and executed for the 1959 murders of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas. The case had similarities with the thoughts that Smith and Hickok were in the nearby area after stealing a vehicle that was similar to one that the Walker family had wanted to buy. But in 2013, the bodies of Smith and Hickok were excavated and tested for DNA in order to match with some found at the Walker family home, and it came back without being matched. Investigators still find Smith and Hickok as the most viable suspects, but it's also thought that it may have been somebody that the family had already known based on the personal items that were stolen. The case remains open to this day, with no motive ever being listed. The Austin Yogurt Shop Murders. The 1999 Austin Yogurt Shop murders was an unsolved quadruple homicide that took place in an I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop in Austin, Texas, on Friday, December 6, 1991. The victims were 4 teenage girls, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, and Jennifer's 15-year-old sister Sarah. Jennifer and Eliza were both employees of the shop, while Sarah and her friend were in the shop to get a ride home from Jennifer when the shop closed at 11 p.m. An hour before closing time, a man who had tried hustling customers in his queue was permitted to use the toilet in the back, where he took a very long time, and it's thought that he may have jammed a rear door open. A couple who had left just before closing, when Jennifer had locked the door at the front to prevent more customers from entering, had reported seeing 2 men at a table acting strangely. Around midnight, a police patrol officer had reported a fire inside of the shop. First responders had discovered the nude bodies of the girls inside. 3 of the bodies lie stacked on top of each other, while Amy's body was found in a separate part of the shop. The victims had been shot in the head, with some being violated. It's thought that all 4 were stacked, but Amy had managed to crawl away from the others. Initial investigation had led to many suspects. A .22 and .380 caliber pistol were used to commit the murders, and the perpetrators had most likely exited through a back door that was found unlocked. The organized method of operation and ability to control the victims, along with destruction of evidence via arson, had pointed to an adult that was experiencing crime rather than teenagers. The Austin Police Department reportedly had DNA from an unknown male as a result of one of the violations. After testing, there was a Y chromosome match for the perpetrator in a research database of the FBI. but the identity of the man couldn't be revealed due to the law of anonymity for donors, and thousands of men could bear this fragment of DNA. There were plenty of suspects, the strongest being a group of teens that had been caught around a mall, with one of them, a 15-year-old, being found with a .22 caliber pistol. Initially, they were giving promising information, but after tough questioning, the detectives decided that he was just trying to get himself out of the gun charge and had eliminated him and his 3 friends from the crime, none of which being older than 17 at the time. Several years later, those teens were brought back in and accused of being participants in the murders. No records were held of what they said in their initial interrogations, which had made it impossible to know whether the detectives had supplied information to the suspects in the initial interrogation, or if they had known on their own. 2 of the 4 had been sent to trial, entirely due to self-incriminating statements, with the only evidence against them being confessions. The 2 were convicted, one being sentenced to death, and the other being sentenced to life in prison, as he was 15 at the time of the crime. However, the prosecution's tactic of using excerpts of alleged confessions at the other's trial violated the Confrontation Clause because the co-defendant was non-testifying. Both convictions were overturned on that clause alone, and the men were freed in 2009. The prosecution insisted that they wouldn't be retried, with forensic investigation further proving that the DNA found in a victim belonged to none of the 4. Texas courts then later decided that those released were not entitled to compensation because they hadn't proven that they didn't commit the crime. One of the detectives in the interrogation, Hector Polanco, had also been accused of coercing false confessions in an alternative case, which resulted in 2 men being put in prison for 13 years, one of them being assaulted in prison, resulting in permanent brain damage. 7 jurors from the trials said that they wouldn't have convicted the men if this evidence was available at the time. Police state that over 50 people, including McDuff on the day of his execution, had confessed to the yogurt shop murders, but to this day, the case was never solved. The Bain family murders. The Bain family murders were the deaths of Robin and Margaret Bain, along with 3 of their 4 children who were shot to death in their home in Dunedin, New Zealand on the 20th of June, 1994. The only suspects in this case was David Bain, the oldest son and only survivor, along with Robin Bain, the father. David Bain, at the age of 22, was eventually charged with 5 counts of murder, and he was convicted on each count and sentenced to a mandatory life sentence with a minimum parole period of 16 years. Bain's case was picked up by former rugby player J.L. Karam in 2007. Bain's legal team, guided by Karam, successfully appealed to the Privy Council, which declared that there was a substantial miscarriage of justice, and he was released on bail in May of 2007, but he was retried in 2009, which ended with him being acquitted on all charges. But with the acquittal of David, there were never any other suspects listed, which makes this case still unsolved to this day. The Atlanta Ripper. The Atlanta Ripper was an unidentified serial killer suspected of killing at least 15 Atlanta women in 1911 and 1912. On May 28th of 1911, the body of Bella Walker, a cook, was found 25 yards away from her home by her sister after she had failed to return home from work the previous night. Her throat was cut by an unknown person. The Atlanta Constitution reported the crime with the headline, "Woman Killed, No Clue to Slayer." When the news of more murders continuing to spread, the black population of Atlanta were filled with terror. On July 3rd, after the 8th consecutive killing, the Baltimore Sun had reported the news that the murders had caused few black women to be on the streets at night, and black service workers refusing to show up to work after dark. While the Ripper may have had up to 21 victims, there is no conclusive proof that the murders were carried out by one person. It's reported that one of the daughters of the victims was attacked by an assailant but had survived. She described the man as a large black man who was powerfully built and neatly dressed. But to this day, there was never any suspects listed or anyone arrested in this case. The Connecticut River Killer. The Connecticut River Killer was a serial killer responsible for a series of stabbing murders in and around Claremont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut River Valley, primarily in the 1980s. In the mid-1980s, 3 young women disappeared around Claremont. In 1985 and 1986, the skeletal remains of 2 of the women were recovered within 1,000 feet of each other in a wooded area in Kellyville, New Hampshire. The conditions of the remains made the cause of death difficult to determine, but some factors pointed to multiple stab wounds. Between the discovery of the first and second bodies, a 36-year-old woman was stabbed to death in her home in Saxtons River, Vermont. 10 days later, the remains of the 3rd missing woman were found. An autopsy again revealed the evidence of multiple stab wounds. At this point, investigators examined previous homicides in the area and found 2 other cases in 1978 and 1981 that reinforced the presence of a serial killer. At the peak of the investigation, and after additional homicides and one non-fatal attack, investigators noted similarities, often used dump sites, and specific wound patterns that linked the murders, suggesting a common perpetrator. There were multiple suspects in this case. Let's get into them. Delbert Tallman. On May 20th, 1984, 16-year-old Heidi Martin went for a jog in Heartland, Vermont, on Martinsville Road. The next day, her body was discovered in a swampy area behind Heartland Elementary School. She was violated and then stabbed to death. 21-year-old Delbert C. Tallman had confessed to the murder and was tried, but later recanted his confession and was acquitted. Nearly 3 years later, one of the victims of the River Killer would be found a mile away from where Martin was discovered. Tallman had resided in Bellows Falls, Springfield, and Windsor, Vermont, as well as Claremont, New Hampshire, which was the epicenter of most of the Connecticut River Valley killings. In 1996, he was convicted on 2 counts of lewd and lascivious conduct with a child and was incarcerated at Lake County Prison in Florida for failure to comply as an offender. He was released in 2010, where the circumstances of Martin's murder and information related to an arrest and trial of a suspect, some cite Martin's death as an unsolved part of the killings. However, no evidence presently available to the public proves Tallman was in any way involved with any of the other cases. Gary Westover. In October of 1997, a 46-year-old paraplegic Grafton, New Hampshire resident named Gary Westover had spoken with retired Grafton County Sheriff's Deputy Howard Menon and said that he had a confession. He said that in 1987, 3 of his buddies had picked him up for what was described as a night of partying, but allegedly they had loaded Westover and his wheelchair into their van and set out to Vermont, where they had abducted, murdered, and dumped Agnew, which was one of the Connecticut River Valley Killer's final victims. Westover provided the names of the 3 friends. Thereafter, Menon had shared Westover's information with his wife, daughter, and law enforcement. However, Menon felt that authorities weren't interested in his information, and Westover eventually died in 1998, with Menon dying in 2006. In August of 2006, one of Westover's aunts had wrote to Annie Agnew, the sister of the victim, with the information originally given by Westover to Menon. Agnew forwarded the letter to Carthy, who ran Nicolau's name by Westover's aunt, who stated that the name had sounded familiar. Carthy believes that the authorities are in possession of the names that Westover had provided to Menon, and further speculated that Westover may have known who became acquainted with Nicolau at a local VA hospital, although none of this has been confirmed, and the Connecticut River Valley killings remain unsolved. Our final case for this episode is the Lebaron and Langford families massacre. The Lebaron and Langford families were driving together in a 3-car convoy en route to a wedding, carrying residents of the isolated La Mora community, which is predominantly composed of American Mexican independent Mormons. When gunmen suddenly opened fire on their cars, 9 people were killed, 6 women and 3 children, with some being burned alive in the car, all of whom held dual U.S. citizenship. It's believed that a drug cartel was most likely believed to be behind the attack. Mexican officials announced at a news conference that they believed the reason for the attack had been the family was thought to have been a cartel convoy of vehicles. Prior in the day, in the area of the massacre, there had been a shootout between rival cartel gangs. But, according to a member of the Dallas Morning News, targeting of the victims may have been due to activism by certain extended Lebaron family members having been, quote, over the years outspoken in their condemnation of criminal groups that hold sway over a wide swath of northern Mexico. 3 suspects, including the mastermind, Roberto N., believed to be members of the La Linea drug cartel, were arrested on the 25th of November 2020 in this case. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm sorry, it's still kind of iffy with the uploads. I am, like I said, uploading once a week, but I'm probably going to try to up that and get the numbers up just because I know it doesn't take that long to make these type of videos. I just have a problem with, doing schoolwork and being lazy and other shit like that. But I'm going to try to be more productive from now on. I want to thank you guys so much for 5,000 subs. It means the world to me that I even got this far. And hopefully we can continue to reach other milestones in the future. But for now, that's going to be all for me. I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, and evening. I love you all, and I'll see you hopefully soon in the next video.